Welcome back, Legend. Today I want to talk to you guys about how to improve your fitness for your sport. So this one is more just specifically about conditioning for your sport. So the first thing that we like to do is review the demands of the sport. So what is the duration? And this can go into a couple of different ways. So we can look at duration from a season point of view. We can look at duration from a game point of view. So how long does the game go for? And then we look at it from a per effort point of view. So what I kind of mean by per effort is that there could be rotations. Let's say there's a game, AFL lasts 120 minutes, but the athletes aren't on the field for 120 minutes straight. There's a quarter time, a half time, and a three-quarter time. And then within the quarters as well, that are roughly 30 minutes each, they're not on for the full 30 minutes. They might have 1 to 2 rotations depending on their position. Which leads me to the next thing, positional. So there's different positional demands. If we think about in soccer, the goalkeeper is going to have a very different fitness base to someone who is a winger, or even a winger versus a striker. There is definitely certain elements that each are going to have, but realistically the goalkeeper doesn't need to be anywhere near as aerobically fit as, say, a winger. They still might need some kind of aerobic fitness, but maybe just not to the same extent. And in fact, trying to get them to that level might actually be detrimental, because realistically, a lot of their work is just explosive reactive power. And if they're not focusing on that and training that often, because they're spending too much time doing aerobic long, slow distance stuff, then they might be taking away from the thing that they actually need. This also leads me to the next point, which is intensity. So what are the ratios of different levels of intensity within a sport? Is the sport all continuous? Does it have varying intensities where there's some moments where we're walking, there's a percentage where we walk, there's a percentage where we start jogging, there's a percentage where we run, and there's a percentage where we actually sprint? And then how much is your sport made up of each of those things? Because that can give you an idea of what you need to work on in regards to getting the most out of your conditioning that'll transfer towards your sport. This leads me to the next point, which is make it as specific as possible, but plan and periodize. So we want to set out a plan that is kind of leading from one point, so point A, to point B. Now, along the way, the training stimulus does need to change a little bit. So when we mean training as specifically as possible, think about what your sport requires. Does it require a lot of sprint, repeat effort stuff? Or does it require a lot of endurance-based stuff? Does it require a mixture? So at different times and different phases, you can implement different conditioning. So the further away from your competition or your season, the more general the conditioning can be. And then leading into the season and getting closer to that in-season competition block, you want to make the conditioning more specific. Now with this, the way we kind of view this is the kind of bucket analogy. So the bucket analogy is if we've got multiple buckets and we're trying to fill each bucket. Buckets as a whole represents your athleticism. So if your sport fills the kind of long, slow distance bucket, what is the point of doing more long, slow distance running or conditioning in your training? If you are getting that stimulus from your training, from your sport-specific training, just leave that as is. You're getting a fitness effect. What are you not doing in your training that you could potentially add to top up one of the other buckets? So let's say you're not doing some high-speed running, or you're not doing enough high-speed running. We could add in some intervals, some maximal aerobic speed intervals. We could add in some change of direction conditioning. So this is how we become a little bit more specific to the sport. So your fitness or your conditioning sessions transfer really well into your sport. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create a bit of an overload. So something that you're not going to quite get, and by having the capacity to be able to do some of these other things at higher thresholds, when you go back to the lower intensity of your sport, it feels a lot easier. The last point is to integrate. Integrate your conditioning into the overall plan. So we know that there's a certain amount of time we need to spend on skills. There's a certain amount of time we need to spend on strength work. there's a certain amount of time we need to spend on recovery from all this training. So the conditioning needs to fit within that. So we need to be careful that we don't overload one of our buckets per se. The skills is likely always going to take priority. This is going to depend on the phase of training. Off season, there's really no skill work, so we can really increase our strength and conditioning bucket. Pre-season, the skill component is going to increase quite significantly, but we still need a bit of conditioning in there. In season, realistically, the conditioning should just be the actual training and competing itself, and maybe the only extra little bit that you do is more recovery and lower intensity based. Hopefully that helped, guys. Cheers.